what happened?
Well, there was a sea of students who apparently have been involved in the protest here, and I'm not surprised that they didn't welcome our visit because we're calling out their activities. The point we tried to make today is that this is not who we are as Americans. This is not an expression of the First Amendment. This is not an exchange of ideas. This is threats and intimidation of violence against Jewish students for who they are, for their faith. And that's a terrible trend that's going on in the country right now. We have these similar types of activities and what are becoming violent protests on campuses around the country. And members of Congress, I believe, have an obligation, a responsibility to speak about this and to demand that it come to an end, because it's not good for us.
The main thing they were chanting was Free Palestine.
Right.
How is that anti-Semitic?
Well, what's anti-Semitic is that Hamas endorsed this protest today. Within the last 2 hours, they issued an endorsement statement and heralded the students here and said, this is the next generation of leadership in America. If you're getting endorsed by Hamas, that's not a good look. It's not a good sign. Some of these students apparently are unaware of the atrocities of October 7th, or they're denying it. They deny that women and children were brutally raped and murdered, that infants were placed into ovens and cooked alive. The things that happened there are unspeakable, and yet they're out there waving flags for the very people who committed those atrocities. This is not who we are.
Speaker, in those early days, I was in some of the kibbutz, and you could smell the death and the bodies. It was horrific. And yet what's happened since has been horrific too. And there's a student here, a PhD student at Columbia. I wanted to quote him. He is Jewish. He has written a testimonial about what's going on here right now, his experience on campus. And he says, I'll read it to you, the most pressing threats to our safety as Jewish students do not come from tents on campus. We should be focusing on the material reality of war. The munitions our government is sending to Israel, which killed Palestinians by the thousands, and the Americans participating in the violence. Do you think that protesting the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, protesting the tens of thousands of innocent people who have died there, is anti-Semitic in and of itself?
I think there's always a place for debate in the free exchange of ideas, but let's not equivocate on what's happening with Hamas and in Gaza. This is a battle, as Netanyahu said, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, between good versus evil, light versus darkness, civilization versus barbarism. This isn't a close call. We have terrorists who preyed upon and attacked viciously and killed many innocent Israelis. And the idea that they would be out here in support of that. Hamas is using civilians as shields for themselves. They put their operations under hospitals and schools. They are using civilians in a theater of war. And so it's difficult. Why would someone blame Israel for trying to stamp out the very terrorist threats that are right there on the doorstep? We should not be dictating to Israel their military strategy. We should be supporting our ally, which is the only stable democracy in the Middle East.
Is there anything Israel could do that would be over the line for you? Because when you talk about stamping it out, I mean, many innocent children have died and are dying at Israel's hands in the IDF.
There have been civilians murdered, but that is not the fault of Israel. It's the fault of the terrorists, the Hamas operators and soldiers, the terrorists who have used these people and put them into harm's way. Israel, I'm convinced, is doing its very best to prevent civilian casualties, but this is a war, and they're fighting for their very existence, and they are not the aggressors. It is the other side. Some of the people here seem not to understand that, and I think that's a real problem. We can debate the merits of all these things, but what they're doing here is intimidating Jewish students. That's the thing that is so problematic.
All right, so let me ask you about that, because when it comes to that, the NYPD, at least as of Monday, said they've not received a single call from Columbia University of reports of any physical harm.
Well,
no physical harm.
Right, but you have to speak to these Jewish students who are in fear of their lives, who are cowering in their apartments right now, who are not coming to class. In fact, the administration recognized the threat was so great, they canceled classes. Now they've come out with this hybrid idea. Well, if you're Jewish, maybe you do want to stay at home. Maybe it'd be better off for you. But it's so discriminatory. It's so wrong in every way. The responsibility of a university administrator is to keep peace on campus and ensure the safety of students. Job number one. If they're incapable of doing that, then you need different leadership. I think this is time for a really strong hand.
I'm trying to understand, though, why as Speaker of the House this is an issue you would want to get involved with. It's a private university. It's an issue happening here. Why is this something that you are choosing to get involved in and calling for the removal of a president of a private university?
Well, they receive federal funding as well, and Congress is looking at all of these aspects to determine how they're using those funds. Is that appropriate? If they can't fulfill their basic obligations, I don't think the American taxpayers want to be funding this kind of thing. We know that professors are engaging in this as well, some of the professors. Some have been supportive of the Jewish students, but I believe it's a small subset for what I've told. They've allowed this to go on, and it is not okay with the American people. This isn't a partisan issue. This is about right and wrong, and we've got to call it for what it is.
And so when people talk about genocide and say that Israel is engaging in genocide, do you think that that is a legitimate conversation that they should be allowed to have as part of First Amendment rights here? Or
Well,
no?
of course. Look, I was a First Amendment lawyer for 20 years. I went into the courts and defended our First Amendment freedoms, religious expression, the right of free speech on campus. I litigated those cases. Of course, the university is supposed to be the free marketplace of ideas. But when you shout down and physically threaten with intimidation and threats of violence the other side, that is not a peaceful expression, a peaceful exchange of ideas. That's something very different, and that's what we're saying they need to get control of. When they camp out around the campus and they prevent students from exercising their rights, that's the problem.
Before you go, obviously we're here in New York as there's been threats to your speakership back in Washington. What does it say about your standing as speaker that you are here at Columbia University dealing with this issue right now?
The Speaker of the House has a very important constitutional responsibility. It's an officer listed in the Constitution. The Speaker speaks for the House of Representatives, and I felt it was very important for that voice to be heard, not just about what happens at Columbia, but about what is happening right now around the country. And we have to stand unequivocally for the right and the good, and I'm calling on all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to speak out against this. Not to endorse it, not to coddle these people, but to say this has to stop. We have to treat every single person with dignity and respect, and that's not happening here, and it's an atrocity.
Speaker Johnson, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.